Hi everyone, thank you for coming today. My name is Jessica Alcott-Ulmo. I am the Director of Climate Security Programs at the American Security Project. We are a think tank based in Washington, D.C., and I'm really pleased today that we are able to partner with both the University of Maine as well as the Natural Resources Council of Maine to host this public panel discussion on climate change and national security considerations in Maine. So with that, Anya, would you like to introduce yourself, and then we'll pass it down the panel. The way that today is going to work is we'll start with some questions that we already have for the panel to get the conversation going, and then we will turn to the audience to field some questions from all of you. Okay? So Anya.
Great, thanks Jessica. Hi everyone, my name is Anya Fetcher. I'm the Federal Policy Advocate at the Natural Resources Council of Maine. We are an environmental nonprofit organization, and we work to protect the nature of Maine, and I'm thrilled to be here with you all. I'll pass it down to Jim.
Jim Settley with the School of Policy and International Affairs. I'm the director there. Got out of the Navy about 27 years ago, ended up here at the University of Maine, and I'm like, what can I look into? What questions can I ask? How can I use my Navy experience? And certainly with the Climate Change Institute and its expertise here, my interest and expertise in high-level strategic security issues, combine the two, and climate security, climate change security became a focus for me. That was 13 years ago, and there was like 2 books in the world written by Jeff DeBelko and Ken Konka on climate change security. Now there are dozens of books on climate change security. So it's evolved immensely, and we've been able to go ahead and stay with it for a little bit, and look forward to answering some questions today.
Great, thank you. My name is Hannah Pinkery. I'm the Director of the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future in the state of Maine, and also the co-chair of the Maine Climate Council. And it's awesome to see some Climate Council members out there. Lots of folks across the state do heavy lifting to help put together Maine's climate action plan, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more today. We actually just had a Climate Council meeting this morning. We are almost at 2 years from Maine's 4-year climate action plan, and hearing tons of exciting stuff about what's happening in the state of Maine to both reduce our emissions, to meet our aggressive emission reduction goals, as well as prepare our communities for the impacts of climate. So excited to be on this panel. I think this issue is a really important one. It's an important one for Maine communities, and certainly an important one for the world. And I don't have as impressive a title, but I'm honored to be here with so many folks who have served the country, so I'll pass it off.
I think it's pretty impressive, Hannah. My name is Jamie Barnett. I'm a retired Rear Admiral in the United States Navy, 32 years in, and I get to be on the consensus for national security with the American Security Project, which is a group of national security leaders that speak out on issues, and of course one of the primary ones, and it's one that I think the nation has not really come to terms with, and that is climate change is a national security problem in a number of different ways that we'll discuss today. I might add too, even though you hear this thick Southern accent, I have Maine roots. My grandmother grew up in Booth Bay, and I spent some time in the shipyard down in Bath.
Thanks everyone. So I'm just going to go right into questions, and the first one is for Director Pingree, though if either of you two want to chime in, feel free. So in 2019, Maine created the Maine Climate Council, which produced a 4-year statewide climate action plan, Maine Won't Wait. According to the 1-year progress report, Maine is on track to meet its goal of using 80% renewable sources for electricity by 2030. So, Director Pingree, what challenges, successes, and lessons have you learned so far?
Great, well, good question. Just to step back a little bit, Maine's climate action plan is both about reducing our emissions, and we have an aggressive goal, and it matches the goals that lots of states around the country are making, the federal government is making, and obviously countries around the world are making. And the whole point is to reduce our emissions, to try to slow, obviously, what we are seeing today, which is accelerating pace of climate change. So one of the major strategies for reducing our emissions is to transition much of our economy to be electrified. So Maine's Climate Action Plan is a lot about electrifying our transportation systems, electrifying our heating systems. There are other technologies as well, but that's a major means of reducing our emissions. But to do that, we obviously need clean energy. We need clean energy to be powering all of these systems. So Maine has an aggressive, what's called a renewable portfolio standard goal that is now to meet 80% renewable energy by 2030. At the point at which we passed it in 2019, it was among the most aggressive in the country. We have a couple states catching up with us, but obviously that's a big goal and it's a lot of work. And what does that mean? It means we are deploying clean energy across the state. Primarily right now that is solar and onshore wind power. We are also looking at a future, and I see somebody from Senator King's staff who's helping the state of Maine and the University of Maine deploy the first floating offshore wind in the country. So we see incredible potential for clean energy as a driver of jobs in the state of Maine. I will just say right now we're at 45% renewable energy on Maine's electricity grid, but obviously as we electrify our economy, we need more and more clean power. So this is to 2030, we're on track. To get to 2050, where we really want all of our energy to be coming from clean sources, it's going to be a lot of heavy lifting. So I would just say the lessons so far are you have to put it in law, you have to make it a requirement, and that is what the state is doing. You have to have policies that make it so, but at the same time you need to make sure that you are ramping up the permitting, you're ramping up the workforce, you're having an ability to provide transmission where necessary, and you're investing in innovative technologies. Like, again, Maine sees offshore wind as a huge opportunity. So lots of lessons and challenges in there. I will just say this is not always easy work. People like the idea of clean energy. It sounds great, but we obviously have to make sure that we are balancing it with other uses of land, whether it's farming or forestry. You also have to make sure that you are talking to neighbors about where projects are being sited. You have to figure out how to talk people into the need that transmission to get this clean energy where we're going to use it is important. So it's not all easy, it's not all sexy work, it's a lot of heavy lifting, and a lot of that heavy lifting is going to happen in the state in the coming years, in the coming 30 years, but the next 8 years are big ones. So I'll just say that I see a lot of students in this room, engineers, electricians, transmission workers, policy workers, people in communities who believe in clean energy will be needed, because we're not going to meet this goal if we can't kind of continue this pace and make sure the people of Maine are on board.
It's my turn to ask a question now. So we're going to pivot a little bit to more of a strategic lens. The Department of Defense has been thinking about this since at least 2014 under Secretary Hagel, when the DoD actually issued its first climate adaptation roadmap. So that was 8 years ago, right? So this has been an issue for a long time, and although it sort of changed shape and took a different form, it's very much been a priority for the United States military, and that is going to be sort of the focus of this question. Instead of, there are many elements of security obviously, but we're going to focus it on the military. So Admiral Barnett and Captain Sedley, can you talk at all about what you see as the biggest priorities, the biggest changes with the climate adaptation plans from the Army and the Navy? Electrification is a big issue, just like it is for the state of Maine. Can you talk about what you've seen and what you've experienced personally as active duty members?
Sure. So, and I'm certainly not correcting, but I will note that the Center for Naval Analysis in 2007 issued a very important report that basically, said we have got to do something and identified climate change as a national security matter, something that we have to do. And that's, from two sides. Number one, the impact, so the adaptation part of what's already happened. And I might mention, this is not the purpose of this conference, but if your house is on fire, the first thing you have to do is put the fire out. And for decades and decades, we've had people joke about climate change, laugh about it, continue to vote for people, and now we see that people have been flooded, burned, have breathing problems and stuff like that, when they expected their elected leaders to actually look at the science. And the science has been around for a long time. We've known what to do. Now we have to do it. But the first thing is to recognize that, and so in the Department of Defense actually recognizing that we own a lot of waterfront property. We are going to spend trillions of dollars to deal with that, just to keep doing what we've already been able to do. Portsmouth is one of our major shipyards, depot level maintenance. We're going to have to do that. It's going to become much more susceptible to flooding at some of our most critical types of systems, such as the submarines. We are really looking at the fact, the DoD's also been a big polluter too. We're trying to move away from that as we look at our tactical vehicle fleets. We'd like to go to hybrid. I don't think we'll ever go fully electric on our tactical vehicles. Non-tactical, we could go straight to electric. And that is in the plans, and we've got Dr. Kath Hicks, who's Deputy Secretary of the Defense, who's got it. And she's pointing out the advantages of an electric fleet. They're quiet. You can sneak up on people and things like that. So there's lots of advantages to actually addressing this. And I guess we can get into later about the world events. We'll talk about, this is about adaptation, right? So.
Yeah, if I could add just a little bit to that, Admiral. You pointed out that CNA report in 2007. I said I made that flip from the Navy to academia in right around that time frame. And you're right, it was just then, around that time frame, even a little earlier, that we started to see climate change as an existential threat written into our national security policy and our national military policies. Right? It was buried. It wasn't quite up front, but I remember speaking to a climate change institute group of students, and I got up there, and one of the first slides I had was the national security strategy, national military strategy, and then some of the service strategies. And I said, okay, here's where we're starting to see climate change in these strategies. And of course, I got the question, what are those? I go, okay, I really need to go back with the scientists on this a little bit. So that's where it really kind of started. And it was interesting because it evolved from there at the time, and I think you were serving at the time, we both were, was Secretary Mavis. And Secretary Mavis was really, it was not a bad word in the Pentagon. There was a couple of secretaries of defense that were realizing that climate change impacts globally, and again, we'll probably get into that a little bit later, was a significant part of what the United States military mission was not turning into, but needed to pay attention to. So at that point, Secretary Mavis is looking at biofuels for the green fleet, biofuels for ships, biofuels for airplanes. As an aviator, you want to make sure you got good gas in your engine when you go off the pointy end, because if you don't, it's like that's not the time to be experimenting. But the drop-in fuels were working, and they were working well. We got away from that a little bit with the change in secretaries of both the Navy and of the Department of Defense. But the point I wanted to make is, and the Admiral went there and just a little bit more, is that the Department of Defense, believe it or not, has been on the leading edge of climate change research and development. And so whether it's drop-in fuels, whether it's microgrids, whether it's whether it's any number of different things, solar, portable solar panels, the Marine Corps. Now, if you go out into the field, one of the things that they most deal with is their tooth to tail. It's the supply. It's the folks that are bringing the petrol up to the front lines. It's the guys that are the men and women trying to move the gas and supplies and so on. All of a sudden, you don't need gas because they've got portable solar panels that they roll out on the MRAP. I see Adrian, I don't know if you ever dealt with those or not. You roll them up, you plug your radios in, you charge them up. There's no gas, there's no generator. Now you're going somewhere. Now you're decreasing your supply. So there are national security, there are tactical security and operational security implications. So people go, oh wow, that's really nice that the Navy and the Army and the Air Force were doing all these incredible R&D on climate change impacts, security impacts. Well, they were doing it because it impacted lives. It allowed us to save soldiers, Marines, Airmen, and Navy lives. And so that's where the impetus started. We've had a waning of that over the years. With this administration, with this Secretary of Defense, we are back as a military, U.S. military. I'm not there anymore, I should say we. they are back to leading on some significant research and development in this world. And it's interesting, if you look at the recent act, the Inflation Act that was just signed by the President, part of that act talks about matching the Department of Defense mobilization of climate change impacts. And so that act itself recognizes that the Department of Defense is doing this, because guess what? They don't have to go to the Hill to get a vote to say, we're going to go ahead and make our installations do this, our electric vehicles do that, or they don't have to, they just do it. And then they get to use that research, share it hopefully with the rest of the world or the rest of the civilian populations.
Yeah, if I could pile on to that, I mean, it's interesting that the Department of Defense doesn't always do things for exactly the right reason. So, for instance, I was really pleased when the Navy opened up, most if not all of its slots to women. Well, I said, oh, that's really altruistic. There's the equality. No, they needed the people. I mean, they couldn't get enough men to come in, so they opened it up. So that wasn't really the right reason, but at least they did the right thing. And this is the same thing with climate change and national security. They realize it's important to national security. And so people out there that you talk to who might not get fired up about climate change may be able to get fired up about national security. And so that's why we're trying to use that as a way to pull people in and see, we really do need to act. We talked about it, we studied it, now we need to act.
You know, it's interesting with both of the services, at least the Navy and the Army have released climate change plans this past year. And both of them, prior to the Inflation Act being signed, we're talking about going to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. The Army wants to I can't even say the right word. How do you say that? Electrify. Thank you very much. They want to electrify all of their vehicles, even combat. So I'm with you, sir. I'm not quite sure. And I'm looking at Adrian. How do you do an MRAP, in the field or whatever? But they want to electrify all of their vehicles by 2035. They want to go microgrids by 2027. And so they are this is all in plans that came out from Department of Defense prior to this act. And so, like I said, they don't have to wait for legislation or presidential acts or anything. They get to go ahead and move forward because they know it does save lives. They know it's the right thing to do. And you're right, sir. I mean, one of the things we've seen over the years is that the military is rarely altruistic. There's a little bit here with this one, because they understand how much of their time with respects to disaster relief and humanitarian assistance they're spending in every theater. It is now a major mission in every combat theater that the United States is, and we are involved in every theater in the world. And so the time that we spend on those are a result of what's going on with climate change, amongst many other things in the world. So.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little bit more to that. While the state of Maine is transitioning to electrification, and the DoD and all of the elements are also, and I should also add that the Air Force will have a climate plan. It is just in the last stages of getting across the finish line. So all of the service branches will have them. But DoD also has the ability to drive industry change. So this will also, in conjunction with the benefits that are in the Inflation Reduction Act for the state of Maine and the rest of the states, this is going to drive industry and it's going to create jobs. So this is a really big thing. It's a really big deal. So we should be really proud of that. I know that obviously the IRA is not perfect, and there are some communities that feel that it could have gone farther, but it's a big deal and it's going to do a lot of good in terms of fighting climate change.
Can I just add one more thing?
Oh, please.
I just want to add a very minor Maine element in that I was telling the Admiral that Maine's National Guard, as we one of the elements of our climate plan is that state government should lead by example, that we should help communities lead. And as we sort of surveyed state agencies, well, the National Guard was already doing these things. They were already thinking about how to electrify their buildings, reduce their emissions. They were thinking about emergency management. How do these buildings survive off the grid? So battery storage was already being considered. So I just would say, before I heard about all of this and before our climate plan was really in place, Maine's National Guard, because of the Department of Defense, was already investing. So good things happening in Maine, and I will say our General Farnham in the state of Maine drives an electric car, and he was one of the first ones to sort of tell me how well it works. So I just would say leading by example is important and a big deal.
I'm going to add one more thing onto that as well. For those who aren't aware, I was really excited to learn that Senator King was actually one of the co-sponsors of the Military Fleet Electrification Act, which would require that 3/4 of new non-tactical vehicles purchased by the DoD would be zero emissions vehicles. So that's another really big point of pride for the state of Maine.
You know, the interesting part there is that act is yet to be passed. It's in work, right?
Yes.
And the Army, Navy, and I'm going to bet the Air Force will do the same thing, already have plans to do it by 2035. So they're going to legislate what they're already doing. I thought that was kind of an unusual, but now the services can't back out because it
Yeah.
is legislated.
Thanks so much. This is great. Because we brought up the Inflation Reduction Act, I think I'm going to jump to that question. So as probably many of you know, the Inflation Reduction Act was recently passed by Congress, and it was the biggest piece of climate legislation in U.S. history, which is very exciting. So I have a question for Director Pingree and the two of you as well, but there are several clean energy benefits included in that, and one of which is a lot around energy independence. So I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about what some of the most important takeaways are for this legislation and what you think some of the challenges to implementation will be.
Great. Well, I will just say, I see somebody from Senator King's staff. We are very grateful for the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. It is a big deal. We, again, just had a Climate Council meeting this morning, and we were taking off all the opportunities we see in that act. I will say, actually, combined with the bipartisan infrastructure law, which also invests in clean energy and electric vehicle deployment, in adaptation and resilience, these two things together allow us to really accelerate Maine's pace of action on our climate plan, and they're a big, big deal. The Inflation Reduction Act, well, I'm not an expert, and we're actually constantly trying to look at the White House website and get briefings and understand the tax provisions. And I'm sure the folks on either side of me will help add to this. I think there are 3 elements that are a big deal for Maine. I think the first is innovation in clean energy, so to both invest in everything from green hydrogen that maybe can power some of those vehicles, maybe produced by Maine offshore wind, to ways to bring down the cost of solar and energy efficient technology. So a ton of investment in innovation, which really is something the U.S. has not invested in as much and will be a big deal for deploying clean energy at both a pace and affordability that will be good for the American people and good for jobs. I will say there's a lot about, again, deploying clean energy in terms of tax credits. So there's tax credits on solar, on wind, there's transmission. So a lot that will allow us, when I talked about Maine's goal for clean energy deployment, that will allow that to be both cost competitive, it will accelerate its pace, it will really get the market involved. So that's a big deal. The other thing we're paying a lot of attention to are all the opportunities to help people, average Maine people, Maine businesses, as well as schools and others, do things like electrify, put clean energy on their roofs, invest in electric vehicles, and invest in energy efficiency. So just a ton on the tax side, on the investment side, especially for moderate and low income families. So again, it's a big deal. We are trying to sort out all the different pieces, from a new green bank, which will be a loan fund, to the tax credits that will be available for lots of people in the state of Maine. I think the challenge, honestly, is to make sure we take advantage of the opportunity. So bipartisan infrastructure law is about a 5-year investment in our infrastructure. The Inflation Reduction Act, which we're now calling Uncle Ira, is many of the provisions last about 10 years. So the challenge is to make sure that those people, those communities that need it most, those under-resourced communities, the small towns in Maine that don't have grant writers, know it's coming and they are ready to apply. So we're thinking a lot about, as these programs come online, how do we make sure that we look across our entire state and make sure, again, those people who need this most, who would benefit the most. We've got a winter coming where we see record fossil fuel costs, and we're worried about the people of Maine being able to afford their oil bill. So helping them invest in new technology, good old-fashioned insulation, energy efficiency measures that will lower their bills, that's a big deal. It will improve people's lives. It will save them money. So how we make sure we can get this to as many people as possible is really our major area of focus. And again, I see Leslie Furno in this room who leads this work in Dover Foxcroft, really on the front lines of helping communities do everything from building window inserts to invest in energy efficiency. So that's where our area of focus is. But everything in this bill, I think, it's not perfect, but it's a lot. So it's good news. Anybody else?
The only thing I'll say is just the policy behind the bill, and that is we've had for 50 years American presidents have talked about energy independence, and you don't have to look any further than Europe and what's going on with Ukraine right now to see just how much the well-being of people depends on being independent from petrostate autocrats and from unstable regions and things like that. So the more we can do things like this, the more that we have leadership from the United States in actually addressing things, electrification and energy independence, reducing the demand for oil, the better we'll be in the United States, but also it'll be stabilizing for the rest of the world, our allies as well.
I do that.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Sir, you've gotten close twice there to mentioning just how dependent we are on the people that are leading us in office, right? And so one of the first things you said was, we won't go. We'll be careful with that. But one of the things you mentioned earlier, vote. Make sure you're voting for people that support the climate change, legislations that we're looking at. Because what we've learned, and it happened in DOD, and it's happened in the leadership of our own country, and we're seeing it in other countries, a couple in Europe, that if you have, and it's not deniers anymore, I think, but people that don't make it a priority. If they're leading the way, what happens to the IRA? And people say, oh, it's legislated, it's happening. All right, well, you haven't paid attention to some of the things that have happened here in the past. So we do, and you mentioned a little bit about the U.S. credibility in the world. Withdrawing from the UNFCCC, and that's Paris Accords. That's ridiculous. And so we're back going to COP. Tori have fun there in Egypt, right? And so, and we need to be leading the way. And we do that by passing things like the IRA, by DOD taking lead on certain projects, and how incredibly important that is. But that is so personality based, whether it's in the state, whether it's in your towns, whether it's in this country. And so you really, I think people and voters are paying more attention to that, except right now it's inflation. I think climate's not number 10 anymore. I'm pretty sure it's in the top 5, but let's hope it stays there.
Can I just add one more thing? And I would just bring it back home to Maine a little bit more in that the issue of fossil fuels has made Maine less economically secure. And again, looking forward to this winter, we are the most heating oil dependent state in the country. We are by far an outlier. We have 60% of our families relying on heating oil to heat their home. The national average is 4%. And we also, I might add, have the oldest housing stock in the country and among the oldest population in the country. So those factors combined show just the vulnerability of our own people due to our reliance on fossil fuels. So you can sort of see the ideal perfect world in which we are able to help people make their homes more energy efficient, electrify them, and reduce their costs. Obviously, it's a huge win for people. Whether or not they care about climate, it's a huge benefit. And obviously, all that clean energy coming from the state of Maine. Right now, we export over $4 billion a year to fossil fuel companies and to other states to buy our energy. That number is probably going to be bigger in the year 2022, just based on fossil fuel prices. That is a huge vulnerability to our state. Obviously, our entire country is facing that vulnerability right now. So just the security implication and the emergency management implications for families, I think it's just it's not just the existential worldwide threat, it really is a threat even to people here this winter.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question before we open it up to Q&A from the audience. And since we touched briefly on emergency management, the Defense Department and National Guard units are being used more frequently for defense support to civil authorities during emergency response and disaster preparedness. So climate change is impacting the military and military units in several ways. One of them is increased operations in these sort of non-traditional combat fields, as well as readiness and operations. So could Captain Sedley or Admiral talk a little bit about that, from Black Flag days to opening Arctic? Can you talk a little bit more about sort of how all this ties together for national security?
I'm going to bet we both have a lot to say on that. I mentioned earlier that one of the missions of the U.S. military, Department of Defense, has a very prominent mission in each of the theaters is humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. And I talk about not just climate change security, but I talk about environmental security, whether it's the horrible tidal waves that hit not only the east coast of Japan, but hit Indonesia 10 years ago, killed 150,000 people. First responders in there, both of those from external was the U.S. military. It was the Navy, actually, in bringing their capacity to help with those. We were talking earlier today in class about floods in Pakistan a few years ago. They're flooding again, and you probably read it, 30% of that country is about to be underwater, including most of their rural agricultural areas, at a time when there's not a lot of grain coming out of Ukraine, the breadbaskets of Europe or in Russia. And so the military has taken on, because they have the capacity, State Department doesn't have the capacity, Homeland Defense, FEMA, they don't have the bodies, the tools that they need to respond to large events. So the military is taking those on as missions. So as the climate changes, because what's going on in this country, whether it's in the Admiral mentioned earlier, fires out west, droughts in the Midwest, hurricanes that are hitting in places they've never hit before. What's going on here is happening around the world. The UK is facing one of its biggest droughts right now. Compounding the grain not coming out of Ukraine and Russia are droughts in China and in other parts of the world. It's going to be, we talk about the impact on Maine, and there's a significant impact on Maine. We're going to have the world's greatest humanitarian disasters in this coming year because of this change to the environment. So the U.S. military is a tool that the presidents and the secretaries of defense have used to go ahead and help where they can. And it's an important mission. We do it in this country. Our own Guard, thank you, our own National Guard have responded to environmental emergencies in this country. Our maniacs are in a place where they can deploy on a moment's notice, whether it's to New Orleans when they're flooded or any other parts of the country. So the military is in a place where they've been able to help in the past. It has now been a formalized mission of the military service, as it should be, right? We're talking about American lives. Isn't that one of the most important things that the military is here for? And so that's been formalized, and you're seeing that commanders of the different regions using this mission, this capability to go ahead and be much more responsive. The old days of no, that's not what we do wars. That's gone. And so, and today what we do is we do what we can for American lives, and not only American lives, but our allies and other global lives too. So it is a formalized mission, it's important. And so anything that the service does or we do as a country to go ahead and mitigate climate change issues makes the world, we need to lead, so hopefully others are following, whether it's with R&D or actually doing the mitigation, carbon capture and so on. We can get away from that mission if we're not doing, but you know what, in the next 20 years, whether it's with the sea level rise, whether it's with the flooding in countries, or any number of disasters, I can guarantee you if you're connected some way to Washington, then the U.S. military will be there to support. It's not going to fix the problem, but we certainly are ready to go ahead and respond to those problems.
And Jim, that was beautifully said, and I don't have much to add. I mean, I do think probably most Americans don't realize that the military has that HADR, as he mentioned, HADR responsibility. It is a response, and one of the things that we talk about with regard to national security, though, is putting the fire out in the house first, so that we don't actually get to the conflicts that come from the fact that there's water crises in a lot of places in the world, not enough water, and attended with that, not enough food, or extreme heat, or migration because of any of those things, where you're bringing different populations together who may not like each other that much, and therefore there's going to be conflict. And so there will be disasters that the military will have to respond to around the world and at home. But unfortunately, there will also be conflicts that we may be drawn into, where American service members are going to be in harm's way for a conflict that might have been avoided if we had done something 20 years ago. Can't do too much about that, but for something we could do today. Maybe we could avoid something in the future if we do something today.
Okay, so now, well, thank you very much for that. We can open it up to questions. If you have a question, just raise your hand. If not, I will just start talking about critical mineral supply. There's got to be a question. There's one. Yep.
My name is Sam.
There you go. It's on. It just took a second.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Samuel. I'm a first-year grad student at SPIA. With the state of Maine and the whole of US trying to electrify themselves, are they considering helping their allies also to do same? Because I realize if the US is doing it alone and its allies is not doing it, at the end of the day, US may face problems, because US is just a tiny, it's just contributing its part to the climate issue. So if it's only doing it and other people are not doing it, at the end of the day, it's probably going to be cost 90. So I was thinking, instead of the US sending military to other countries probably to help them in terms of disasters as a result of climate change, they should rather focus on helping those countries to also model what they are doing, instead of always probably waiting to send military to help them in terms of needs.
Yeah, hey, Sam, thank you for the question, and you hit right to a point about we can do all these wonderful things right here in Maine and in the United States, but if we're not helping the countries from Africa and Latin America and Central Asia and so on, then we're not changing. We're not changing the world. We're going to be dealing with the same climate issues, and more importantly, unless something changes across the world, we're going to with increased issues. So how do we take the R&D and the things that we're investing in this country and affect countries like Ghana and the other African countries? One of the things that we can do, leading by example, that's really nice if you can follow the example. But if you can't follow the example for funding, then okay, great, that's really nice, appreciate the show, but we got to do what we got to do to stay alive in our own places. Hopefully, part of what the Department of Defense in the United States, whether it's through the different governments and the different capitals in different states, is for instance, electrifying cars. You're going to see, as a result of the DoD investment and now the U.S. investment in electrifying cars, that is going to. You think we're at a place now where they're pretty good? They're not affordable in Accra, I know that, but at the 10 years from now, they will be. They will be because of research and development that's going to happen, I think, not only in this country, but perhaps in China, perhaps in the UK, and so on, are going to bring costs down, batteries are going to improve, and there's going to be much more support. I'm being hopeful. My glass is half full here, that there's going to be a lot more support for developing countries with respects to their ability to go ahead and whether it's electrify or to have, and that's, I'm just using electric cars. Think of what Hannah was just saying about all the things that they're working on in this state to help a very rural population deal with a very cold winter, a very expensive winter. And I think of your country folk in Ghana, and the R&D that's going into those kinds of things that are going to bring costs down. Hopefully, this is not going to happen tomorrow. We're not going to be able to provide electrified cars to the African countries to lower costs and lower impact. But over the long term, hopefully there is. But your point is that if the U.S. does this in a vacuum, this would be like Maine doing it in a vacuum, right? And if Maine's the only one doing it, and Vermont and New Hampshire and Massachusetts are going, hey, thank you very much for doing that, then it doesn't go anywhere. If the U.S. doing it in a vacuum with the rest of the world, and I'm not talking about Europe, I'm talking about the other 180 countries, If they aren't getting support from the West, if they aren't getting support from the US and China on their climate change or their own ability to decarbonize or whatever the thing may be, then we're not going to get to where we need to be as a world here by 2050. We can be net zero in 2050, so what if the rest of the world isn't? So.
And I would just add, when Governor Mills took office in 2019, the U.S. had pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords, and Maine joined something called the U.S. Climate Alliance, which was a group of 25 states around the country who had basically said, we are still in. We are, and they were really among the largest states in the country, including California and New York, so we represented the majority of the U.S. population and GDP, and we basically said, we need to figure out how to continue to reduce emissions in our state so that we, as a country, can help to reduce the emissions around the world. So, I mean, I think to your question, I actually think the U.S. has the responsibility to reduce our emissions as much as we possibly can, since we've been a major contributor to global climate change. Obviously, we're talking about benefits, but the responsibility to do that heavy lifting is also important. I mean, I would say, Maine is a small state, and a lot of people say, well, why didn't you do this in Maine? Like, our emissions compared to the rest of the country is minor. Well, I mean, it's important that we all do our part. Again, we see benefits to people and communities by also doing this work to both prepare and reduce our emissions, but it is part of kind of the work that everybody needs to do. I will also say, I think the points about hopefully innovation bringing down costs will help the rest of the world, and while I'm not an international diplomacy expert, I will say a lot of the conversations that have happened at most recent COPs are about what do nations that have contributed most to global emissions, what is their responsibility to those nations who have not? So there are obviously commitments that have been made by the federal administration on this. How do we help those nations who will not have the funds to invest in clean energy, and yet their people would be greatly supported by it? So that's a question. I will just say to the points that we've heard, increasing heat, impacts on crops, flooding. I mean, we are entering a period that is challenging, that could get worse if we don't find ways to reduce our emissions. So I think there is a responsibility for us all to sort of consider how to do this for the sake of humanity, and it is at least good to see that people are talking about a more constructive way about considering our neighbors around the world. So,
I went to that COP, the very first COP after we pulled out, and it was COP24 in Katowice, and I'm looking at Tori because she gets to go here in about a month and a half or so to Egypt for COP28. And the State Department had this tiny little office upstairs. They weren't allowed to come out of their office. But the U.S. was there in force, and we all had pins called WASI. We are still in.
Yeah, so just I know we have a lot of students of strategy and policy in the audience, and senatorial staff who I would also say are students of strategy and policy. And in looking at the organs of government, the military, of course, is not the one that's going to be able to help these countries, at least in advance. We have very limited, mill-to-mill type things. This is really going to take a change in the way that the United States does business. And for years and years, I've heard complaints about, foreign aid, we need to reduce foreign aid. Why are we spending? Foreign aid is part of our national security because we absolutely depend on global security. And so we really need to see increased funding to the Department of State. We really need to see increased funding to USAID. And so we're talking both about climate mitigation, what are we going to do to reduce this, but adaptation. There's stuff that we're just going to have to do because we've already, seriously impacted. Ghana will be impacted by rising seas. Ghana will be impacted by, increased heat. And so the United States needs to start shifting, should have already started shifting more toward, how do we help, our friends around the world adapt to this climate change?
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Leslie Furno, and I live in Piscataquis County, which is very rural. And I am jumping off from something Hannah said a little earlier. My concern about how we help other countries to come along and electrify their grids and do this climate better, improve the climate. First of all, they're not contributing to the major problems with the climate. But you know, the reality is we live in a world that is an industrial growth world. And that relies on trade and making money off of products. And in our country, we make a lot of money off products that we want to sell in other places. And historically, some of the things we've done in other countries, underdeveloped countries, Africa, other places in the Middle East, is to sell our stuff to them. And I have a real problem I think we have to change our culture in the way we think about the aid that we're giving. Are we giving it, or are we actually giving it because our companies are making money? And I think the commodification of the work that we're doing is a risk, actually, to the success of the program. So I'm just throwing that out for anybody who wants to comment on that. I appreciate it.
I will say you're right. I think that is one of the things our foreign policy in general. I won't just say with aid, just our foreign policy has been, how can we break open your market for our businesses? And we have to go a lot further than that. And one of the things that I would say, particularly for the students who are studying, is watching what the Chinese are doing right now with their Belt and Road project. They are buying the world, and they're not going into it with the missions of making sure that it's a more secure place or that it's more climate friendly. They just want to influence, and we have to look at the way that that's happening and counter it with the policies that we think are correct, which should be far beyond just breaking open markets to our products. You're right.
I mean, the only thing to add, it's not really a direct response to your question, but I think we certainly have seen during the pandemic, we've seen over the last couple of years the challenges of some parts of our global economy and supply chains, and I think a lot of our climate plan is actually thinking about the opportunities where we can consume food, use forest products, consider energy that is from the region, from the state, that obviously reduces emission. I mean, international shipping, flying your food across the Atlantic. I mean, these are things that are challenging. So I know we just heard today in our climate plan, our Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry is thinking about how to really help farmers increase food production to feed people in Maine and in the region. That again, that's not quite the answer to your question. I will say the Inflation Reduction Act really doubles down on American-made batteries and the chips that we need for lots of our technology and our vehicles, and making solar panels in the U.S. I think we certainly live in a very global economic environment, but the challenges of that have been significant for the state of Maine, for this country, and certainly for countries around the world. So actually sort of supporting more independent economies where people can be more self-sufficient, it's good because it reduces emissions. We're not moving stuff quite as much around the world, and it also can be good for those economies. So again, not the perfect answer to your question, but at least an opportunity we see in Maine.
Hi, I'm a climate policy student. I took Captain Sedley's climate security class last semester, and I'm glad that you guys brought up energy security and energy independence, because as we're electrifying and moving to renewable energy, we're going to be using a lot more rare earth materials, and I'm just wondering what your comments are on how that's going to undermine our energy independence as we electrify, because those are also coming from unstable and developing areas of the world.
You should answer that. Why don't you answer that?
I'll take a shot, Tori, thank you. We told you to ask a question and you had to come up with that one. Okay. Be careful what you ask for. So I'm looking at Baudet in the back because he brought this up in class not too long ago. I think some of you might remember how we're taking rare earth minerals out of countries in Africa. And so here we are talking about climate change and how we're going to help the world solve this problem. And I know I'm being sarcastic a bit, but and at the same time, we are as responsible as China is in pulling those materials out of countries in Africa, and thus contributing to part of the problem. I don't have an answer to your question. I don't think there is a good answer to your question. And how does, because there's a need for those materials, to create the things that we need. Hopefully in this country, that we keep talking about these making our own chips. It's not going to happen. We're doing it now, but it's not really going to produce chips for 3 or 4 years, from what I understand. But where are those rare earth minerals coming from? Are they still coming from the countries in Africa? So we haven't changed a lot, except we're not shipping them from Taiwan. How does that improve I'm not sure that there's a connection to energy security. That's a whole different question, I think. Except that with the improvement of batteries, the ability to capture the electric grids that people use, I think we're going to be able to become more energy independent. Not just us, but that's the kind of R&D, hopefully, that becomes inexpensive and gets shared with the rest of the world. We'll see if that really happens. But you're right that the rare earth minerals that we're still pulling out are still coming out of the same places. Unless we find new sources for those materials, they're going to come from Ghana, and they're going to come from other West African and other African countries. And we're going to need those materials to continue. Hopefully we can do it in a much more appropriate way than we have in the past. I don't think I got to your question on the connection between the two. I'm not sure I followed exactly where you're trying to connect the rare earth materials and energy security, or energy independence.
But if I understand it, you're asking, we're going to need more of those if we're going to produce energy in a different way than just burning fossil fuels. I think that's the way I understood it. And I would have to tell you that, if you look at history, what's happened is when some mineral is needed someplace, we just go get it and we spill a lot of stuff, and then there has to be a cleanup or disaster afterwards. And what I hope we do in this one is, even if we are going into a country whose perhaps they don't have the inspectors or the legal framework, I hope the United States will insist on it. And what it's going to do is it's going to cost more. We're going to have to pay for it. And that's what I hope we do. And I hope our national leaders actually go ahead and put requirements on the United States to where we will do that. So this is, conflict diamonds. We don't want conflict rare earth either. We don't want to kill people to be able to get the things that we need. And hopefully we'll have that policy on the front end rather than try to clean up on the back end.
I would just add a couple minor notes from where I sit. I will say the Inflation Reduction Act, hopefully music to NRCM's ears, invests significantly in recycling programs. Our landfills are filled with things that are needed, that can be needed for some of the battery storage technologies, lithium, other things that are needed. So frankly, not throwing it away, finding ways to make them last much longer. So, and a lot of this comes back to innovation. And I know that there are scientists and others who are thinking about how do we move away from some of the most damaging raw materials that are needed to invest in new things. And there's everything from algae to green hydrogen that offer huge opportunities. I will say, though, that some of these rare earth metals are in the United States. They are in the state of Maine, where we have much better environmental laws. Do people in our communities feel, are they concerned about how we mine them? Absolutely, for good reason. But I will just say that to some degree, some of these solutions are here, and we need to think thoughtfully about what's possible in this country, what of these could be responsibly mined, much more responsibly than probably other parts of the world where, again, we have some of the most strict environmental controls in the world. So I think there are opportunities, there are hard conversations to be had, and it isn't just about what region of the world gets exploited to make this possible for everybody else.
And the only thing I'd add, Tori, is that, the energy security and energy independence, right? Whether Hannah's talking about it with respects to energy security in the state of Maine to take care of the people, one of more rural economies, or the Admiral talking about it with respects to national security implications. We're watching what's going on in Europe right now with respects to Russia. We have connections to Venezuela and in the Middle East still with our energy dependence. So working on becoming energy independent, not only as a state, but also as a country, and hopefully creating the opportunity for other countries to do the same so they can divest themselves from the energy requirements that tie them to places that they don't want to be tied to. That's a significant national security implication not just for us, but think of those European countries right now. They are not doing in Ukraine what they want to do because they're afraid of being cut off 100%. And if they didn't have that connection, you would probably see more support for you. That's just one small anecdote. Energy security, energy independence, and you think of the connection to climate change security is absolutely something that, whether it's to help people in Maine or to, make sure that countries aren't tied to despots and autocrats who are going to use it against those countries. That's something that I think we're really learning now more than ever with respect to what we're watching going on in Europe.
I think we have time for one more question, but I would just add on a positive note, there's some really, really cool innovations happening. I think it was Finland that just created a battery out of sand combustion. So there's some really cool innovation. It goes back to the DoD R&D, research and development, sorry, lots of acronyms. But there's some really cool innovation happening, but there's something that Captain Settley touched on before I really want to drive home is that this will take time, right? We cannot stop using fossil fuels overnight. It's not possible. So we need smart people, and there are very smart people, very dedicated people thinking about this problem and trying to do it in the most effective way possible. So I think we have time for one more question. We will be available after for sidebars and things, but please.
I don't want to take away a student's question if anybody has any other questions, but I'm Edie Smith. I do work for Senator Angus King. I work here in his Bangor office. I just want to say thank you. I wish he could be in this room with us. He would be nodding his head up and down and jumping up to make comments. As you know, he serves on the Intelligence and the Armed Services and the Energy and Natural Resources Council. So those worlds collide in everything, in all ways that you've been talking about. But I wanted to speak to Hannah's comments about the state of Maine, how proud we are here. Our motto is Dirigo, I lead, and people say as Maine goes, so goes the nation. We have so much innovation here in the state of Maine. We have so much to be proud of here on campus, things like Habib Dagger's lab, working on offshore wind platforms, the floating platforms, it's transformational for our energy uses in the future. I just wanted to do a little bit of a PSA. Senator King actually did a floor speech in the Senate floor yesterday. I believe it's on our website, or you can find it on YouTube. But it was speaking directly to the issues that you've been talking about today. Renewable, clean energy, how that will affect things. He talks about earth minerals, the importance of batteries, but the crux of the speech is because we need clean, renewable energies to grow, we also need common sense regulations and permitting. So that was very interesting. He also, he talked about Ed Muskie. He quoted Abraham Lincoln, as Hannah, he does all the time. He talked about Moses, so you can be very entertained if you click in and listen to it. It's about 22 minutes long, but I think it piggybacks very nicely to the comments today, so thank you.
Moses had his own way of dealing with rising seas.
That's what he talked about.
Did he? Okay.
And I just want to thank you so much for that. I just wanted to add one more comment as well, going back to the fact that all of this progress, it will take time. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of people. And as Director Pingree mentioned, one of the great things that we're excited about with the IRA is the investments. So it's going to take money, and that's part of why the passage of this big climate spending bill is going to make such a huge difference. It invests in the innovation, in the technology, discovery, and whatnot. So, just wanted to add that part on. So, do we have any final questions? Oh, one more?
If we have time. Hi, Adrian Horn. I'm a first-year SPIA student, and quick question. A lot of the discussion that we've had around focuses on big, overarching issues that seem unreachable. In my opinion, it's really about not even the last mile, but the last 10 yards. So I would love to hear from each of you, if you can share, what does the current last 10 yards look like? I had the opportunity here from the Department of Defense last week. We talked about we own the night. Night vision technology has changed over decades. Now the DoD is talking about we own the green. So what does that look like? And I guess what does it look like in this moment right now, not just from defense, but from the person at home trying to charge an electric vehicle?
I'm going to start by dodging that question. You know, and it's you ask about the last 10 yards, and the metaphor I'm going to use is the crawl before you walk, before you run. We're not even crawling yet. We're still in the crib. And so to know what the last 10 yards looks like means that you've got a pretty good idea with the other 90 yards, and I'm going to assume it's a football field, and that you've already got an idea of what that looks like. We're on the 10 going down. Too many metaphors there, I apologize. But I don't know the answer. And I don't know that anybody knows what the last 10 yards is. You know, one of the things that I know we have to do, and we haven't done, and I'm just going to say in this country, we haven't done it in this state. We are doing it now, is continuity. We need to have, we need to not go from politico to politico and have it changed overnight and so drastically, whether it's credibility in the world or whether it's credibility in this country or New England, whatever it be. And I don't know, that's the whole political issue that I don't, that's not my world, man. But we need continuity. Give us 4 years, give us 8 years, give us 12 years of doing this. And maybe we'll have a better idea of what that last 10 looks like. And I hope it's a country that's, we got zero carbon emissions. Whether it's 2050 or sometime. I also know that if we're not really, right now today we're vested in this. If we're not vested in this 2 years from now, next election, if we're not vested in this, 8 years from now, whatever it is, then we're on a path right now where sea level rise is going to happen, whether we like it or not. No matter what we do, we're going to get 3 to 5 feet of sea level rise. That's all there is to it. And so in Portsmouth Naval Shipyard's working on it, and Norfolk Naval Shipyard's working on it, and every other military and a whole municipality, including those in Maine, are working on it. But we're still crawling, brother. We got a long ways to go before we get to that last 10. Ask me that question in 10 years, and maybe I'll have a better answer.
I would just add, it's a great question, and again, I wish I had the right answer. I think about the opportunities right now in front of us in the state of Maine, and I think your question is a good one, and that is, what can each one of us do to actually keep the football metaphors going, move the ball down the field? And I think there's a lot we can each do. I think as policymakers, as young people, as community citizens, it is actually consider the practical steps we can take that have so many co-benefits, whether it is, again, make your home more efficient with more insulation, install a heat pump that can keep you cool and provide lower electricity bills and contribute to emissions reductions. We are actually leading the country right now in heat pump deployment. We have, Aroostook County was leading the state, the most rural, northernmost part of our state was leading, at that point, the whole country in heat pump deployment. So we know that these step by step, we are actually starting to solve the problem, and I think it's making it reasonable. It's helping people navigate through it. It's giving them incentives to make it affordable. It's ensuring, for example, energy is affordable to keep all those things going. So it's going to take a lot of ongoing work by policymakers, and I agree with the continuity point, but I think it's making it very concrete for people. And we have a program right now called the Community Resilience Partnership. We're trying to get at least 100 communities in the state of Maine engaged. And it is about citizens sitting around the table. All right, what are the things that we should be concerned about as it relates to climate adaptation, and what are the things we can do in our town to reduce emissions for people's homes, for our public fire stations and town buildings, and then what kind of taxpayer money will we save? So it's just being very what are the things that can be done? And honestly, again, I'm sitting in state government. We have all kinds of ideas and plans. We have incentives. We have new federal programs coming, but it still takes action. It takes, talking to your parents, going to your community meetings, talking to business leaders, talking to schools, asking Maine to do more. These things need to happen at every level, but there's a lot of very specific things. So I think we've got the tools now. So we need everyone to rally for these tactical steps that have so many benefits.
Yeah, so I can be accused of beating a metaphor to death. The fact of the matter is, I really am going to dodge the question. It's not the last 10 yards, it's the next 10 yards. I mean, in football, you have to make first downs. And I'm very pleased now. I mean, having this legislation, which, by the way, I mean, I thought I was keeping up with stuff, but it just seemed to come together. It was just amazing how it came together. But, you know, for a long, long time, we had to listen to junk science about why we shouldn't address it, while there wasn't even a climate change problem, you know, jokes about it, things like that. So to me, number one, we're in the right ballpark now. We're on the field, we're playing, and we need to make sure that this becomes more and more of a nonpartisan thing. It shouldn't be partisan. It just shouldn't. People's farms are getting wiped out. People in cities, you know, my kids live in Northern California. I've had a niece who's had to move from California because she has asthma. I mean, this affects everybody. It doesn't matter who they vote for. So it shouldn't be a partisan issue, and I think that's the next 10 yards. Rejecting junk science, rejecting the people who think this is a joke, and actually trying to make this a nonpartisan issue.
I'll just pile on by saying, I think you all just being here is a huge step in the right direction. Because there's a lot of people that can't even speak. You don't need to be a scientist to be able to speak climate. You just need to be able to understand, hey, you know, how is more frequent extreme weather going to affect my vacation plans or my semester, or you know, what happens to my family, or where I want to get a job. Just talking about it and thinking about it is really, really important, and having those skills and developing skills is going to be great to be able to speak climate and to be able to communicate it. So to beat a dead horse again, vote. I mean, that's the best way to do it, is to stay engaged. Action at the state and local level is critical in this country, and just being here and being present and having the discussion is really going to move the ball down the field.
To score the touchdown.
Yes, and go fight, win. Okay, and with that, I'll leave it for final remarks.
Thank you all so much for your insight and your ideas, and thank you to everyone here for being here and for your questions. I think one of the big takeaways from today is that the work is not over. We heard a lot about the fact that there are climate action plans and, you know, legislation now put in place, but there is so much more to be done. And there were some really great comments on what that can start with. So please, you know, if you have questions, we'll hang around for a little bit longer, and go and talk about this with your neighbor, with your parents, with everybody, and that's going to be a great first step. So thank you all for being here. Thank you so much to our panelists. And